The first time Lena Yazzie saw Red Mesa, the air smelled like smoke, and no one would tell her why. The train wheezed to a stop beneath a bruised sky, and she stepped off clutching a carpet bag that held everything she owned. Dust swept across the platform in pale, hissing waves. Her boots touched Arizona Territory soil, and it felt nothing like the promise she'd held in her chest through 1,000 miles of iron rail. People stared, not with curiosity, but with something colder. A man leaned against a freight crate, arms crossed over his vest, eyes tracking her like she carried disease. A woman pulled her child behind her skirt. No one smiled. No one offered a welcome. Lena squared her shoulders and raised her chin. She wore her best wool dress, the one she'd hand-mended 3 times between Albuquerque and Winslow. It didn't look like much, but it was clean, and she walked like a woman who knew her worth even if she sometimes doubted it herself. A weathered station agent with a cleft chin and tired eyes stepped forward. He didn't ask her name. He just looked at her suitcase, then back at her face. "If you're here for the McAllister man," he said quietly, "you should have stayed on the train." Lena blinked. "Excuse me." But he just tipped his hat and turned back toward the depot door, disappearing inside before she could ask again. Behind her, the train's steam hissed like a warning. She didn't have time to process the chill snaking down her spine before a voice, low, steady, spoke near her left shoulder. "Miss Yazzie." She turned to see a tall man with dark blonde hair curling slightly at the ends, eyes the color of river slate. He wore a canvas duster, dusty boots, and no smile. A man built of sharp angles and unreadable silences. "I'm Isaac McAllister," he said. Lena nodded slowly. "You're earlier than I expected. You're later than I hoped." He said it without humor and took her bag without asking. His hand brushed hers, calloused warm, and he turned without waiting. Walking toward the waiting wagon hitched to 2 muscular Appaloosas. She hesitated. People were still watching. A small group now, whispering. One old man shook his head and spit into the dirt. Lena forced her feet to follow. The ride from the station was long and quiet. The land unfolded like a scabbed wound, red rock jutting from ochre soil, the distant Mogollon rim casting long shadows across the plain. Mesquite trees twisted like old souls reaching skyward. The wind moaned low and steady. She glanced sideways at Isaac. His jaw was clenched, knuckles white on the reins. Something in him radiated pressure like a man holding a dam with his bare hands. "I thought you were a cowboy," she said after nearly 15 minutes of silence. "I am. I was expecting a smaller wagon, maybe a mule." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "There's more ground to cover out here." She stared out across the land. "It's a long way from Santa Fe. You're not thinking of turning around, are you? I don't have the fare for that." He nodded as if that answer pleased him. It didn't please her. "Can I ask why people at the station looked at me like I was walking into a graveyard?" Isaac didn't flinch, but his voice dipped lower. "They don't know you. They don't like outsiders. They seem to know something I didn't." He didn't answer. As the sun dipped behind the rim, casting long fingers of shadow across the path, the road turned, and Lena's breath caught. She expected a wooden house, maybe a porch, a patch of dying crops. What she saw instead was a sprawling stone estate 3 stories high, built into the rise like a fortress. A great house with wide verandas, iron railings, and trimmed hedges. Outbuildings circled like satellites, barns, workshops, bunkhouses. A white marble fountain glinted in the last light. "This is your farm?" she asked. "It's home." She turned to him, suspicion prickling. "You told me in your letters you lived modestly." I do. Lena stared at him, her pulse loud in her ears. You said life would be hard, but honest. That you needed someone strong, someone willing to work. I do. She pointed toward the estate. That doesn't look hard. That looks like someone already won. Isaac pulled the wagon to a stop on the hill, not yet descending the long drive. He kept his eyes forward, voice steady. I told you I was a cowboy. I never told you I was poor. The weight of that sentence sank into the earth beneath them. Lena sat still, her breath caught between disbelief and fury. You misled me. No, I withheld. You would have never come if you knew. I might have. He turned toward her, then eyes searching hers. The last woman who knew didn't make it to the wedding. Silence dropped between them like a blade. What happened to her? She left. That what you tell people at the station, that she left? No, he said softly. We tell them nothing. Lena's mouth was dry. The wind shifted. Far below the house, lights flickered to life, golden and warm, too warm. Why did she leave? Isaac turned his gaze back toward the house. You should see it for yourself. I'm not walking into that house blind. Then don't. He handed her a folded envelope from his coat. Read this tonight. She took it. The paper was creased and fragile. A woman's handwriting inked across the front. To whomever comes next. A chill swept through her bones. Isaac flicked the reins, and the wagon began its descent toward the estate, wheels crunching over gravel like dry bone. The lights grew brighter, closer. And Lena Yazzie sat next to the man she had agreed to marry, holding a dead woman's letter in her lap. The heavy front door groaned as it opened, swallowing Lena into the hush of the house. The moment she stepped inside, the cool air hit her like the breath of a tomb, scented with polished wood, something faintly floral, and a silence that felt cultivated. Isaac stepped ahead, without a word, his boots muffled against the thick rugs that lined the hall. Lena followed her hands, trembling around the handles of her carpetbag, her eyes moving across the high ceilings, the oil paintings, the candle sconces still lit, though dusk had fallen. Every surface gleamed. The house was not just clean, it was curated, intentional, as though someone were always watching. No servants greeted them, but somewhere she could hear the echo of activity, quiet movement, the clink of silver, the distant closing of a door. The weight of unspoken history was so dense, it felt like the walls themselves held breath. Your room's on the second floor, Isaac said, his voice calm but taut. End of the hall. I'll have supper brought if you're hungry. I'm not. It was only half a lie. Her stomach ached with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. He paused at the foot of the grand staircase, turning back to her. There's hot water in the pitcher. The letter. If you choose to read it, do so before morning. Lena met his eyes. And if I don't, then you're no worse off than Margaret was. The name dropped like iron. Lena flinched before she could stop herself. Isaac didn't wait for her response. He turned and disappeared into the west hallway, his footsteps fading beneath the weight of the house. Lena climbed the stairs alone, each creak under her boot, echoing like a memory that didn't belong to her. The corridor stretched long and dark, lined with framed portraits, unsmiling men in dark coats, women in high collars, and distant eyes. She stopped once, halfway down, at a portrait of a young woman with auburn hair and a slight smile, her hand resting on the head of a black hunting dog. The brass plate beneath read Miriam McAllister, 1862. She reached the last door and opened it slowly. The room was too beautiful. A wide four-poster bed with cream linens stood at the center, surrounded by velvet curtains. A real vanity with a silver mirror sat against one wall. French doors opened onto a small balcony that overlooked the garden below. The wardrobe doors were closed, but even from where she stood, she could smell lavender and the faintest trace of something older, like dried roses sealed in an attic. Lena crossed the room slowly and set her carpetbag on the bed. Everything felt arranged, unused, unlived in. She pulled the envelope from her coat pocket and sat at the vanity, her knees stiff with tension. She stared at the letter, the ink faded, the paper soft at the edges. To whomever comes next, it read on the front. Her heart thudded painfully as she broke the seal. If you are reading this, I didn't make it out. Maybe I ran. Maybe I didn't. Maybe you're smarter than me. Maybe you already know what this place really is. But if you don't, the letter was written in hurried, uneven lines. Some sentences crossed out, others underlined twice. This estate is cursed not by superstition, but by the sins that built it. The land was never theirs. It was taken by lies, by force, by fire. They made their fortune on bones, and they cover it with lace and manners and silk dresses. But the land remembers. They told me to stop asking questions. I didn't. I found something, papers, names. I think the lawyer knew. Maybe even Miriam. Isaac. I don't know. He wanted to believe the best, but wanting and knowing aren't the same. I tried to copy what I found. I hid one set in the barn under the loose floor plank near the tack room. The rest I burned when I realized someone was watching. If you find this, don't trust anyone completely. Especially not the final line had been scratched out so hard the paper tore. Lena stared at it, her throat dry. She folded the letter back along its creases and tucked it into the inside pocket of her bodice. Her fingers trembled as she poured water into the basin and splashed it onto her face. The coldness grounded her. The sun was nearly gone now. Shadows slid across the walls like silk. She crossed to the French doors and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was sharp and laced with sagebrush. Below, the gardens sprawled in manicured patterns. A woman in a gray dress crossed from the back of the house to the stable, moving too swiftly for leisure. She looked up once, just once, toward Lena's window, then vanished beneath the eaves. Lena turned back to the room. Someone had placed a green silk gown on the edge of the bed. Its bodice was intricate. Its sleeves tapered the skirt, full and flowing. It was elegant, expensive, and it fit her perfectly. She hadn't tried it on. Someone knew her measurements. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Yazzie." The voice was soft, feminine. "Supper's downstairs. Mrs. McAllister expects you." I wasn't told, Lena began, but the voice cut her off gently. "We always dress for supper." Footsteps retreated down the hall. She stared at the dress, then at the door, then at the envelope in her pocket. Margaret's words burned behind her ribs like a second heartbeat. Especially not the line echoed through her mind, unfinished and urgent. She changed quickly, the silk like ice against her skin. She pinned her hair back, kept her boots on, and stood in front of the mirror. The woman who stared back at her looked elegant, polished, a lady from the city. But it wasn't her. It was a costume, something worn by someone else before her. She opened the door and stepped into the hall. Halfway down the corridor, she passed a second girl standing near the window, a teenager, perhaps 16, auburn-haired and pale, watching her with unreadable eyes. The girl didn't speak, only nodded slightly and vanished around the corner like a ghost. Lena followed the scent of roasted meat and lavender oil to the dining room, and behind her, the room that had once been Margaret Preston's settled back into silence. It waited and watched. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the long table already set with crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and porcelain so fine it looked translucent. A large oil painting of a stormy sea loomed over the mantel, its churning waves illuminated just enough to feel alive. Lena stepped in, her spine taut beneath the weight of the green silk gown and the stares of the people already seated. At the head of the table sat an older woman, her dark hair pulled back into a tight twist, streaked with silver but still formidable. Her cheekbones were sharp, her posture regal. Across from her, Isaac sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. The older woman stood as Lena entered. "Miss Yazzie, welcome to the McAllister estate. I trust your accommodations are to your liking." Lena forced a smile. "They're generous. I am Miriam McAllister," the woman said, her voice smooth but clipped. "I oversee the estate. I believe Isaac has told you little, which frankly is for the best, until we're certain of intentions." Lena blinked. "Intentions," Miriam gestured to the seat beside Isaac. "Come, sit. A bride deserves a proper meal." A young woman in servant's garb entered silently and poured wine into Lena's glass. Her eyes lingered on Lena for a beat longer than necessary, sympathy flickering beneath practiced indifference, then disappeared behind the kitchen door. Isaac spoke without looking up. "This is my aunt. She raised me after my father passed." Miriam's lips twitched. "And your father left you a legacy that now includes this land, the house." And her eyes flicked to Lena, a bride of questionable provenance. "And I responded to a marriage post," Lena said, trying to steady her tone. "Not an inquisition." "Yet here you are," Miriam said, lifting her glass. "And here we are. We do things thoroughly here. Every choice, every person, every silence has weight. The roast was carved. Wine was sipped." Conversation ebbed and flowed around Lena like a current she couldn't step into. Her mind returned to the letter hidden deep in her dress lining, and the woman she saw from the balcony, swift, alert, possibly watching her even now. Midway through the meal, another figure entered. A man in his early 30s, lean with sandy hair and a glint of mischief in his eye. He wore a loosened cravat and a dust-covered coat like he'd just arrived from a long ride. "Well, if it isn't the bride," he said with a grin, "and a lovely one at that." Miriam sighed. "This is Silas McAllister, my nephew. Unruly, unreliable, and unfortunately, family." Silas dropped into the seat across from Lena and poured himself a drink. "I heard there was a new girl at the table and thought I'd come introduce myself before the rumors got to me." Lena eyed him warily. "And what sort of rumors do you expect? It depends," he said with a smirk. "Are you the type who runs or the type who digs? I haven't decided." He raised his glass to her. "Fair warning, this house eats both." The silence that followed was immediate and palpable. "Ignore him," Isaac said coolly. "He lives for provocation." Lena swallowed hard, glancing between the two men. There was a distance between them, not hostility, not quite, but a brittle edge, as though a single word might break something unrecoverable. Miriam dabbed at her lips. "We don't encourage idle gossip, Miss Yazzie, or investigations. You're here to marry, not excavate." "I didn't realize being curious was a crime." "It's not a crime," Miriam said, setting down her napkin. "But in this house, it has consequences." Lena excused herself shortly after dessert, claiming travel weariness. Isaac rose as she did, his eyes lingering on her, something like warning etched in the corners of his mouth. Back in the hall, the air felt different, thicker, more alive. She moved quietly, her skirts whispering across the floorboards. The girl she saw earlier, red-haired, wide-eyed, stood near the parlor door again. This time she spoke. "Don't stay too long in the dark," she said. "It listens." Lena blinked. "What did you say?" but the girl was already gone. She returned to her room, shut the door, and locked it. Only then did she pull the letter from its place, reading again the final scratched line. Especially not, she turned it over, desperate for more, and that's when she saw it. Faintly etched on the back in hurried pencil, barely visible under candlelight, Miriam. The air in the room seemed to collapse. She turned to the window, heart racing. The gardens below looked the same. Calm, controlled, deceptive. Suddenly the lamp on her vanity flickered. She froze. Then she saw it tucked just beneath the mirror like it had been placed for her to find. A single photograph, black and white, old. 3 women arms entwined, all wearing the same green silk gown she now wore. The woman on the right, Margaret. The center unfamiliar. But the one on the left was unmistakable. It was Miriam, only younger, smiling. Behind them loomed the McAllister house, slightly less grand, more raw in its youth. Lena turned the photo over, written in looping, delicate cursive for the ones who tried. She sat down hard, the photo trembling in her fingers. The silence of the room now felt charged. Sometimes she whispered aloud, echoing Silas's earlier words, "The house eats both," and somewhere below the floor creaked as if in response. The photograph stayed with her through the night. Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, wrapped in her shawl, watching the mist creep in across the pastures like a ghost searching for something lost. Her fingers brushed the edge of the old image again and again, tracing the smiles of the women, the haunting familiarity of their eyes. All 3 wore the same green silk gown she'd been given. All 3 stood in front of this same house, and the words scrawled on the back for the ones who tried wouldn't leave her mind. In the morning she dressed simply, leaving the gown hanging like a specter in the wardrobe. The air outside was crisp, the scent of sagebrush drifting up from the earth. She needed answers, and the only place that might have them was the barn. The stable hand Amos was already at work when she arrived. His thick hands worked with slow care as he combed down one of the mares. He was broad-shouldered, rough around the edges, with a streak of patience in his bones that made animals trust him. "You're up early," he said without turning. "Couldn't sleep. Few do their first week here." Lena watched him a moment. "How long have you worked for the McAllisters?" He paused. "Long enough. I found something. An old photo. Miriam was in it, younger. So was a woman named Margaret." "You know them?" Amos finally looked at her. His face, usually lined with a sort of calm indifference, tightened. "Margaret," he said slowly, "was Isaac's mother." Her breath caught. "But she's gone. Died under strange circumstances." Lena stepped closer. "What kind of strange?" He turned back to the horse, brushing in rhythm. "She came here under her own arrangement. A mail-order bride just like you. Married the elder McAllister. Seemed happy enough for a time. But then what?" She started asking questions. About the land, the ledgers, people who'd lived here before. About Miriam. One night she rode off into the desert. Never came back. They searched for weeks. Found the horse. Not her. Lena felt cold settle in her chest. Did anyone ever figure out what happened? "No one with a death wish," Amos said quietly. She left the barn shaken. The stories layered themselves now: Margaret, the green dress, the letter, the photo. Everything pointed back to the same place, the house. And Miriam. Lena returned to her room only to find the door already ajar. Her pulse jumped. She hadn't left it that way. Inside the room was as she'd left it, but something was different. The photograph was gone. She tore through the vanity drawers, the wardrobe, the linens. Nothing. Looking for this. She turned, startled, to find Silas leaning in the doorway, the photo in his hand. Her voice was sharp. Where did you get that? It was tucked behind the wash basin. Sloppy hiding if you ask me. She marched over and grabbed it from his fingers. You had no right. I have every right to be concerned, he said, especially when the new bride starts digging into family graves. Maybe your family shouldn't bury things they don't want found. He gave a tight smile. You're sharper than the others. What others? He walked into the room now, hands in his pockets. You think you're the first to come here under false pretenses? Isaac's not the only one who's written letters. But you might be the first to walk in and actually ask the right questions. She stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because he said, dropping his voice. You should know the truth before you get too deep. Isaac isn't who you think he is. Her mouth went dry. What do you mean he didn't send that letter? Miriam did. She's been running this show since before either of us could walk. Lena blinked. Why would she pretend to be Isaac? Because Isaac has no interest in a wife. Not after what happened to Margaret. But Miriam wants control, and nothing threatens control like a man left to his own devices. The room tilted. She lured me here carefully, and she'll dress you up, feed you, flatter you. But if you get in her way... Lena clutched the photo to her chest. Why are you helping me? Silas hesitated. Because Margaret was my sister. The words hit like a stone. She wrote letters too, he said, before she vanished. Letters no one believed, except me. She warned that things weren't what they seemed, that she'd found something old land deeds names scratched out of the family Bible. She thought the estate wasn't truly theirs. Do you have any of her letters? He nodded. But not here. I keep them where Miriam can't reach. She took a breath. Then show me them. That evening after supper, they snuck out past the servants' quarters and down an old game trail that led into the hills behind the estate. The wind carried the scent of dry pines and cedar, the sky painted with streaks of amber and rose. Silas led her to a cave tucked between two slabs of rock. Inside, tucked into a rusted tin box beneath some loose stones, were Margaret's letters, dozens of them. Pages worn soft by time ink, faded but legible. Lena read by lantern light, her hands trembling. She watches from the tower window. I see her even when I pretend not to. I found receipts for land sales that never happened. Payments made in other names. The family tree is missing pages. Miriam controls it all, but I think there were others here before. Brides who came and vanished. I fear I may be one of them. One line near the end stopped Lena cold. If you find this, it means I didn't make it out. Tell the truth, no matter what it costs. Lena looked up. She knew. All of it. And now Silas said, so do you. She folded the letters and tucked them back in the box. We need to get these out. Silas nodded. But be careful. Miriam doesn't make mistakes. If she thinks you're a threat. Lena stood at the cave mouth, the valley spread below her like a painting waiting to burn. She already does. And from somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed not thunder, but something else. Something older. Watching. Waiting. The night dragged like molasses, thick and slow, clinging to every corner of Lena's nerves. After returning from the cave with Silas, she had hidden the letters in the lining of her travel trunk and bolted her door shut. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house sounded louder. Every whisper of wind against the windows felt like someone testing the glass. She'd been warned. At sunrise, she made her way to the orchard under the pretense of gathering apples for the kitchen. She needed time alone to think to plan. Her fingers moved on instinct as she filled the basket, but her mind spun circles around Margaret's words. The truth wasn't buried deep, it was written plain in fading ink. Land-stolen names erased women gone missing, and at the heart of it all, Miriam. As she turned to head back, she nearly dropped the basket. Isaac stood just beyond the trees, arms folded across his chest. "You've been busy," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "I needed air. You needed to go out with Silas in the dead of night." He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on hers. "Don't lie to me, Lena." She squared her shoulders. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," he said, "starting with what you were doing in that cave." Her chest tightened. "You knew we were out there. I've got eyes, Lena. This is my land." She hesitated. "Then I found Margaret's letters." Isaac flinched, just slightly, but enough. "They're real, Isaac." She warned of everything Miriam's control, the hidden records, the other women. He stepped back, one hand raised. "Don't. Just don't. She was your mother. And she's dead." His voice cracked. "And whatever she thought she found, whatever she believed it, tore this family apart." Lena blinked at him. "You knew, all this time. You knew something wasn't right." He didn't answer right away. Then, staring off into the line of trees, she changed. Near the end, she used to laugh, she'd bake, read to me at night. But then she stopped sleeping, stopped eating. She'd wander the halls, muttering about papers, ghosts, names that weren't hers. Then she was gone. And Miriam? Miriam told me she was sick, that she'd lost her mind. Lena's voice softened. "Do you believe that Isaac looked at her, and for a moment he was just a boy again, scared, grieving, betrayed?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then come with me. Help me find the rest. If we work together." Footsteps. Fast. Urgent. Amos broke through the trees, out of breath. "You need to come. Now." "It's Silas." The words struck like thunder. Lena and Isaac followed Amos back toward the main house, across the open pasture to the bunkhouse. A crowd had already gathered outside. Miriam stood at the center, arms folded, her expression unreadable. "What happened?" Isaac demanded. Miriam tilted her head. "He was found unconscious at the bottom of the hayloft ladder. Head injury. Could have fallen. Or perhaps someone helped him fall." Lena's heart dropped. "He was fine last night." "So you saw him last night?" Miriam's gaze landed on her, sharp as glass. Isaac stepped between them. "That's enough." The physician, a traveling doctor who visited the ranch every month, was crouched beside Silas, who lay pale and still on a straw-stuffed cot. Blood crusted the side of his head. A bandage had been hastily wrapped, and his chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. "He's alive," the doctor said, "but in no shape to talk. Might be hours, might be days." Lena looked down at Silas. His hands were scraped, dirt-caked beneath his nails. He'd fought. He'd tried to get away. She gripped the edge of the doorway to keep from shaking. Miriam's voice floated over the quiet. "It's unfortunate, but accidents happen, especially when people wander into places they don't belong." Lena looked at her, and something cold settled in her spine. The family gathered around the main table for supper, as though nothing had happened. The roast was carved, the gravy poured, the candles lit. Miriam filled each glass with wine, her movements graceful and deliberate. She raised her glass. "To healing," she said, "and to peace returning to our home." Lena didn't raise hers. She sat stiffly, the wine untouched before her. Isaac sat across from her, his eyes shadowed. The silence between them was a scream no one else could hear. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She waited until the house was still, then crept out of bed, pulled on her boots, and made her way down the hallway. She passed the parlor, the study, the locked room she'd never dared enter. But tonight was different. The key. Silas had once said it was hidden behind the clock. She found it tucked behind the gears of the tall grandfather clock that loomed like a sentry at the stairway landing. Her fingers trembled as she fitted it into the lock of the study door and turned. The room smelled of cedar and ink. Books lined the walls. Papers were stacked in careful order on the desk. But it was the ledger that drew her. Thick, leather-bound and labeled McAllister Holdings. She opened it. Pages of transactions, land deeds, names crossed out and rewritten, multiple payments to the same woman under different aliases, mail order contracts signed, then voided. A pattern that formed a story darker than she had feared. These weren't just missing women. They were used, married their names, changed their inheritances, transferred, then disappeared, each one absorbed into the estate, their trails erased. Her heart pounded. Then a sound, the click of a heel behind her. She turned, and there stood Miriam. "You always were curious," Miriam said softly, closing the door behind her. "Just like Margaret." Lena's voice shook. "You murdered her." "No," Miriam said. "Margaret chose to ride out. She chose to confront things she didn't understand. I simply ensured she didn't come back. You think this land gives you the right to destroy lives?" "This land," Miriam said coldly, "was paid for in blood. My family's, my husband's. I protect it the only way I know how." "You don't protect anything," Lena said. "You cage it." Miriam stepped closer. "And you, Lena, have a choice. You can leave quietly, or you can end up like the rest. Lost. Forgotten. I'm not afraid of you." "No," Miriam said. "But you should be." Lena stared at her, something steel-hard rising in her gut. "Then let's see who survives the night." The candle flickered between them, and somewhere in the house the wind moaned like a ghost remembering its name. Of course. Here's the complete Chapter 6, written to match your style structure and all previous context. The darkness pressed close, thick and humming with danger. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears as she stood toe-to-toe with Miriam, the study door closed behind them, like a tomb sealing its dead. The ledger weighed heavy in her arms, proof of everything. Names, dates, lies. She clutched it tight, unwilling to let it slip away. Miriam's shadow shifted in the candlelight. Her voice was calm, too calm. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into." "No," Lena said, her voice low and shaking. I understand exactly what this is." Miriam stepped forward slowly, the heels of her boots clicking against the wood floor with unnerving rhythm. "Then you should understand the cost of crossing me." "I'm not Margaret," Lena replied, holding her ground. "I won't disappear quietly." Miriam tilted her head, eyes glinting with something ancient. "You're right. You're not Margaret. You're worse. You're prideful. You came here thinking this was a romance, a new start, but this," she gestured to the study around them, "this is blood-won land. And you're a pebble in my boot." Lena turned, yanked the study door open and stormed into the hallway. She didn't care if it was the middle of the night, this wasn't just her fight anymore. As she reached the stairwell, she collided with Isaac. His hands gripped her arms to steady her. What she tried to silence Margaret. "She'll try the same with me," Lena said, lifting the ledger between them. Isaac looked at the worn leather cover, then back at Lena. "What is this?" "The truth." Isaac didn't ask more. He simply nodded and followed her to the kitchen where the light still flickered low from the hearth. There, Amos and Elsie sat at the table, both startled upright when they saw the state Lena was in: wild eyes, dirt-smeared dress, wind-blown hair. "It's time we all talked," Lena said. Amos exchanged a glance with Elsie, then pushed back his chair. "What's going on?" She laid the ledger flat on the table and opened it. As she turned the pages showing names, transactions, wedding contracts that began with hope and ended in erasure, no one spoke. The air grew colder with every entry. Amos leaned forward, tracing his calloused fingers over a name he recognized. Elsie pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, "My cousin. She was supposed to come here." Her letters stopped. "We thought her voice broke. She came," Lena said. "And Miriam made sure she never left." Isaac looked like the floor had dropped beneath him. "She told me, all those women, they ran off, that they weren't strong enough for ranch life." "They didn't run," Lena said. "They were stolen." Isaac gritted his teeth. "So what now?" "We take this to the sheriff," Amos said. "First light. No waiting." Isaac nodded. "And Silas, he's still breathing," Elsie whispered. "Barely. But he's strong." Lena looked at each of them in turn. "If we do this, we can't turn back. Miriam's not going to stand by and watch her empire crumble." "She's not the only one with power anymore," Amos said. "Still," Lena warned, "we need to be smart. We need a plan." Isaac rubbed a hand down his face. "We'll take the back trail into town. I know how to avoid being seen. We split up in case she tries to stop one of us." Lena looked toward the window. The stars were fading behind the gray veil of dawn. "Then we move before she wakes." They made ready in silence. Lena slipped the ledger into the bottom of a saddlebag wrapped in cloth. Isaac filled canteens. Amos checked his rifle. Elsie packed medical supplies in case Silas needed to be moved. There was no ceremony to their preparations, just the grim, quiet focus of people who knew what they were risking. As they saddled the horses in the barn, Lena felt a hand brush her arm. "Isaac, you're sure you're ready for this?" "No," she said, mounting up. "But I'm doing it anyway." He gave a small smile. "That's what makes you dangerous." They rode hard into the hills, sticking to the narrow trails and animal tracks Isaac knew by heart. The town lay 20 miles east, but the shortcut through the canyon would shave off hours if they weren't followed. Halfway through the pass, a distant crack shattered the silence. A gunshot. They ducked instinctively, horses rearing slightly, before Isaac calmed them. "She's coming," Lena said through gritted teeth. "She's already here," Amos said, pointing to the ridge above them, silhouettes on horseback. 2 riders, then a third. One of them lifted a rifle. Isaac cursed under his breath. "She sent men after us." They bolted off the trail, heading into a thicket of rocks and scrub. Bullets whined past them, thudding into trees and dirt. Lena clutched the saddle horn, her whole body leaning forward, heart jackhammering against her ribs. Behind them, the thundering hooves closed in. They reached a narrow gorge where the trail split. Isaac shouted, "We'll draw them off, Lena. You take the ledger and ride hard. Don't stop, no." She cried, but he was already wheeling his horse toward the other trail, Amos right behind him. Lena turned her horse toward the canyon, kicking it hard. "Let's go, girl." The walls closed in around her, sandstone blurring past. The sound of pursuit faded behind her, but she didn't dare look back. Every second mattered. She reached the crest of a rise, breath burning, chest heaving. Below lay the town, small, dusty, but alive. She urged her horse down the final slope, hooves pounding against the hard-packed dirt. As she reached the sheriff's office, she flung herself from the saddle and burst through the door, the ledger clutched to her chest. Sheriff Grady, a tall, weathered man with a gray beard and sharp eyes, stood from his desk. Miss Harper Lena slammed the ledger down on his desk, breathless. "You need to see this, now." He opened it, eyes scanning fast. After a moment, he looked up at her, and something in his gaze changed, sharpened. "These are criminal deeds," he said. "Forgery, fraud, possibly murder." "They'll kill to keep it quiet," Lena said. "Then we'll make damn sure the law's louder." He reached for his coat and rifle. Outside, the sky burned with the red edge of morning. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Navajo Ridge, Lena felt something close to hope. But as she looked over her shoulder toward the hills, her blood ran cold. Because Isaac and Amos hadn't come through that canyon with her, and Miriam wasn't done yet. The cell was small, dark, and stifling. The only window was little more than a slit above the door, letting in a thread of light, too weak to show much more than the dust. Isaac sat against the stone wall, a line of dried blood running down the side of his face. Beside him, Amos stirred, groaning faintly. The hit to the head had knocked him unconscious during the ambush, and Isaac had barely kept them both alive by surrendering when Miriam's men cut them off. Still breathing, Isaac asked, voice hoarse. Amos winced, blinking slowly. Barely. Isaac let out a slow breath. Good. We're not done yet. From the other side of the cell door, a boot scuffed against the ground, followed by the clink of keys. Isaac tensed, rising to his feet as the door creaked open. One of Miriam's ranch hands stepped in Clayton, a wiry man with cold eyes and a silver tooth that gleamed when he smirked. "Miriam says you get one chance," he said, dangling the key ring with a lazy flick. "Tell her where the girl went with the ledger, and maybe she won't bury you in a dry creek bed." Isaac stepped forward, slow and calm. "And if I say nothing," Clayton shrugged, "then I get to loosen your tongue the old-fashioned way." Isaac's fists clenched, but he stayed still. "You tell Miriam that burying the truth doesn't make it disappear." Clayton's smile faltered for a beat. Then he stepped back and slammed the cell door shut, the metal rattling like a coffin lid. Amos pushed himself up with a grunt. "We're running out of time." "She's scared," Isaac said. "That means Lena made it. She better be loud about it." "She will be." Isaac closed his eyes for a second. "But she can't do it alone." Amos looked around the cell. Any bright ideas? Isaac stepped toward the barred window and scanned the gap. "Only one. But it depends on whether Miriam made the mistake of thinking she already won." In Navajo Ridge, the sheriff's office was in a state of controlled chaos. Sheriff Grady had assembled his deputies already armed and ready to move, and Lena stood near the desk as maps and names were rattled off like battle plans. "She owns half the valley," the sheriff said, stabbing a finger toward the spread of property lines. "If what's in this ledger is true, then this is more than fraud, it's a criminal ring. Mail-order brides used as leverage, stripped of rights, then made to vanish." Lena nodded, her voice tight. "And I think Silas knew. That's why she tried to poison him. He found something, maybe this ledger, and she tried to erase him too." Grady's jaw worked. "If he can talk, he might be the missing piece we need." "He's at the ranch still," Lena said. "In the main house, locked in. I'll get a warrant and wire the circuit judge in Santa Fe. But we can't wait for the ink to dry. I'll ride out with a few men tonight." Lena shook her head. "We need more than that. Miriam owns the town council, the land office, half the judges between here and the mountains. If we go in guns blazing, she'll bury the evidence and silence the rest." Grady looked at her. "Then what do you propose?" Lena stepped forward, her voice steady. "Let me go back. She expects the law to come. She won't expect me. I'll buy us time." He frowned. "That's suicide. She thinks she broke me already," Lena said. "Let her believe it a little longer." The sheriff looked at her, searching her face, then finally nodded. "All right. But I'm sending Deputy Boone with you." "He stays hidden. If you signal, he moves. We all do. Lena turned toward the door. Let's finish this. The sun had started to dip when Lena approached the ranch again. The land stretched quiet and golden the same way it had that first day, except now it felt like walking into the lion's den with blood already on your hands. Miriam met her on the porch, dressed in black again, the wind tugging gently at her wide-brimmed hat. Her expression was unreadable, but her hand rested on the railing, casual yet tense. "Well, look who found her way home," she said smoothly. "Did the town disappoint you?" Lena kept her tone even. "I thought about what you said, about pride, about survival." Miriam's gaze flicked over her face, suspicious. "And I want what you promised me," Lena said. "Land, position, safety, I'm done running." Miriam let the silence hang a little too long before nodding once. "Come inside." Lena followed, heart pounding beneath her calm. Every step into the house felt like descending deeper into a trap. She caught a glimpse of Elsie near the kitchen, her eyes wide with warning. Lena barely nodded. Inside the parlor, the ledger sat on the table. Miriam picked it up with gloved hands and turned it over slowly. "You're lucky. I've buried people for far less. I don't plan to test your mercy again," Lena replied. Miriam set the book down. "Then you'll marry. You'll keep quiet. You'll live comfortably and never ask questions again?" Lena nodded. "Fine." Miriam raised a brow. "Just like that." Lena stepped forward. "On one condition. What I want to see Isaac. You say he's alive, prove it." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "And why would I? Because I won't sign a damn thing unless I know he's breathing." They stared each other down. The tension stretched until Lena thought it would snap. Then Miriam turned toward one of her men. "Bring him." Minutes passed. Lena's knees shook under her skirts, but she kept her hands, still eyes calm. When they returned, Isaac looked bruised and tired but unbroken. Their eyes met and she saw it. The fire. The plan. "I'm fine," he said, voice rasped. "But I'm getting tired of this hospitality." Miriam smirked. Reunited, how sweet. Lena took a step closer to Isaac. "Then let's make this quick." But before Miriam could speak, a shout echoed from outside. "Sheriff, open up!" Gunfire cracked. Chaos exploded. Miriam spun, barking orders. Her men ran for the door. Lena grabbed Isaac's arm and pulled him toward the back, shouting. Now Boone burst through the side door with 2 deputies. In the confusion, Amos grabbed a rifle from the entry rack and tossed it to Isaac. Shots rang out as the ranch erupted in battle. Miriam, seeing her empire crumbling, grabbed the ledger from the table and bolted for the cellar door. Lena saw her. "She's running." Isaac didn't hesitate. They chased her into the underground storage. The walls were lined with shelves of canned goods and wine barrels. Miriam stood at the far end, gun in one hand, ledger in the other. "You're not taking this from me," she hissed. Isaac raised his rifle. "It was never yours." Miriam's hands trembled. Her finger curled around the trigger. Lena stepped forward. "You said it yourself, this land is soaked in blood. But it doesn't have to end that way." Miriam looked between them, and for a second she looked like a ghost, like the years of rot had finally caught up to her. Then she let out a choked breath and dropped the gun. The ledger fell at her feet. Lena picked it up. The walls of the cellar held stillness, but above them, the sound of boots and lawmen echoed like thunder. Miriam sank to her knees, and the empire built on stolen promises began to fall. The morning after the raid dawned slow and quiet, a golden mist rolling over the hills, as though the land itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Smoke still curled from the edges of the ranch house. A window cracked from a bullet hole, and the front gate hung ajar like a mouth that had nothing left to say. Lena stood at the top of the porch steps, the ledger clutched to her chest, staring out at the valley Miriam once ruled. Below, deputies combed the barns, cataloging the fake contracts and receipts. Women, some crying, some in stunned silence, sat huddled together near the hitching post, wrapped in blankets. The truth was finally out, but it hadn't come without cost. Behind her, Isaac stepped through the busted front door, his shirt blood-stained at the collar, but his stride steady. He walked up beside her, close enough for their arms to touch, and looked over the scene. "She built it all on fear," he said quietly. "And still it burned." Lena didn't answer right away. Her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sheriff's wagons had just begun to roll down the dirt road, carrying Miriam inside a steel cage. For a moment, the woman had stared at Lena from inside the bars, but her eyes no longer held venom, only emptiness. "I never wanted this," Lena said. "I came here to be someone's wife. Not this." Isaac looked at her. "You didn't ask for it, but you faced it." She let out a shaky breath. "The town will never forget what happened here." "They shouldn't," he said, "but they will remember who helped end it too." A rustle behind them turned Lena's head. Elsie stepped out, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes rimmed red but alert. She gave a faint nod. "Sheriff says they've counted nearly 24 women. Most brought here under false names. Some never even made it past the ledger." Lena flinched. How did she get away with it for so long? Elsie shrugged. "People don't look too close at what they benefit from. As long as it was neat on the outside, they didn't want to know." Isaac turned. "And the others, the council, Grady's hauling them in one at a time. He's got warrants already drawn up." "Good." Lena stepped down from the porch and walked toward the women gathered by the well. As she approached, they quieted. Some looked at her with cautious eyes, others with something like hope. One woman stood up, pale-haired, thin as a reed, with fingers shaking around her shawl. "You're the one who brought it down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lena shook her head. "No. You all did. Every one of you who stayed alive through it, who told your story, who didn't let them silence you. But you..." The woman stepped closer. "You gave us the chance." Lena swallowed. "I only did what someone should have done a long time ago." A ripple of murmured thanks moved through the crowd. Isaac joined her side, and after a long beat, Lena said, "We'll need to find places for everyone. Homes, jobs, somewhere safe." "I'll help," said Elsie, stepping up. "I'm not leaving this place in ruins. It was never meant to be a prison." One of the deputies came up the path, tipping his hat. "Sheriff says they're headed back to town. He wants you two to come tomorrow and testify. Make it official." Isaac nodded. "We'll be there." As the deputy walked off, Lena's eyes drifted toward the wide expanse of land behind the house. The fields that had once been lined with cruelty were now empty, open. "What happens to the ranch?" she asked softly. Isaac looked out, thinking. "If the courts rule it, it'll go into forfeiture. Could be sold off." Lena turned toward him. "What if we kept it?" His brow lifted. "You want to stay, not for me, for them." She glanced back at the women. "To turn it into something good, real homes, real work, healing." Isaac considered her words, then gave a quiet smile. "Then we build it. From the ground up." She let out a breath like it was the first full one in weeks. No more lies. No more blood in the soil. No more cages, he agreed. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around their boots, and Lena lifted her gaze toward the morning sky. It was the same sky she'd stared at when she first arrived, empty blue, unpromising. But now it looked like a canvas waiting to be painted. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lena found herself alone in the barn. The horses had been quiet all day, as if sensing the shift in the air. She moved among the stalls, checking on the feed, brushing down the mare she'd once ridden away from this place in the middle of the night. Her fingers slowed over the coarse mane, thoughts drifting like ash. A soft sound made her turn. Silas stood near the doorway, thinner now, his color still pale but upright. A bandage wrapped across his ribs, and he leaned on a carved cane, but his eyes were clearer than she'd ever seen. "They told me what you did," he said. Lena stepped forward. "You should be resting," he waved a hand. "Been resting too long. Needed to see it for myself. The end." She nodded. He looked around the barn, then back at her. "I knew parts of it. Enough to be dangerous, not enough to stop it. I let her get away with too much." "You tried," Lena said quietly. "Not hard enough." His mouth twisted. "I didn't fight her. I just faded." "You survived," she said. That mattered. He looked down, and now she met his eyes. "Now we make sure it never happens again." He studied her, then gave the faintest of nods. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were too soft for this place." Lena smiled faintly. "I thought I was too. You're not." He turned slowly, beginning to walk away. "You're the one who finally cracked it open." Lena watched him disappear into the golden light. As the barn settled back into stillness, she turned back to the mare, pressing her cheek against its neck. "We're going to build something better," she whispered. "Not because we were spared, but because we weren't." Her voice trembled, but her hands didn't. And somewhere deep in the timbers of the old barn, it felt like something finally let go. The courtroom smelled of old wood and dust, like time had stood still in that place for decades. Sunlight cut through tall windows in fractured lines, casting long shadows across the worn benches. The people of Three Cedars filled every pew, their whispers low but electric, like a storm about to break. For the first time in years, they'd gathered not for a town dance or Sunday sermon, but to hear the truth laid bare. Lena sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap, heart beating a rhythm that echoed in her throat. Across the room, Miriam sat shackled at the defense table, lips thin, her once perfect posture slumped under the weight of humiliation. No corset, no veil, no ranch to command, just a plain gray dress and the rustle of judgment all around her. "I didn't want vengeance," Lena told the room voice, calm but firm. "I wanted freedom. For myself. For the women she kept trapped like livestock. For the people who turned away because it was easier not to see." The prosecutor stepped closer. "Did she ever threaten you directly?" Lena looked straight at Miriam. She didn't need to. Everything she did was a threat. Every silence, every ledger entry, every scream behind closed doors, she ruled with fear and people let her. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Sheriff Grady, seated beside the judge, didn't flinch. Neither did Isaac, who stood in the back with folded arms, watching Lena like his steadiness could hold her together. The prosecutor nodded. "One last question, Ms. Danner. Why did you stay?" Lena drew in a slow breath. "Because running meant it would keep happening. Because if I left, someone else would just take my place in the dark. I stayed to end it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. The judge, a square-jawed man with thick brows and a weary gaze, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Danner. You may step down." As Lena walked back to her seat, she caught Miriam's eye. For the first time, the older woman looked away. Elsie was next to testify, her hands steady, as she unwrapped the story of land transfers, false contracts, and the coercive marriages that kept women from leaving the ranch. Her words were measured, but they cut deep, especially when she spoke of girls barely old enough to hold a pen being signed away to men 3 times their age. She called it charity, Elsie said, but it was control. She made their futures into transactions. Silas spoke too, escorted slowly to the front. Though his voice was gravelly and low, every word carried the weight of regret. "I should have fought harder," he said. "I was her husband in name only, but I knew. And I didn't stop her." "You survived," the judge said gently. "I lived," Silas replied, "but I didn't survive. Not until Lena came." The day stretched long into the afternoon. Witness after witness told stories of lost daughters, vanished letters, broken promises. And with every word, the people in that courtroom leaned forward, not out of spectacle, but out of dawning comprehension. Their town had been built on soil watered with silence. Now they saw the roots. When the court adjourned for the day, the townsfolk spilled out into the street, the weight of what they'd heard pressing on them like the heat of the sun. Isaac met Lena just outside the door. "You did good," he said, his voice low. She shook her head. "It's not over." "No, but it's started." They walked side by side through the dusty streets, past stores with darkened windows and people who avoided her gaze. Others nodded at her, tentative but sincere. Back at the ranch, the land was quieter than usual. A few of the women who'd chosen to stay were tending the vegetable beds Lena had helped plant behind the barn. Others painted new boards along the fences, their laughter cautious but growing more frequent. Inside the house, Lena stood at the kitchen table with Elsie spreading out the blueprints Isaac had drawn for the new communal housing. It was just pencil on paper, but it looked like hope. "It's not much yet," Elsie murmured. "It will be," Lena said. "We're going to make it something that heals." A knock at the door pulled their attention. It was Mayor Wright, his hat clutched nervously in his hands. "Ms. Danner," he began. I wanted to say, I didn't know the half of it." Lena raised a brow. "You never asked." He flinched, nodded. "I know, and I'm not here to make excuses. I heard what you said in court today, about building something better." She waited. "I'd like to help," he said, voice lower now. "Funds from the county, maybe. Lumber tools. We owe you that much." Lena considered him for a moment. "We don't want pity." "Not pity," he said. "A start." After a beat, she nodded. "We'll take the lumber." He gave a half smile and tipped his hat, then turned and walked away. Elsie gave a low whistle. "You're turning heads." "I don't want to turn heads," Lena muttered. "I want to change them." The quote Isaac had said to her days ago echoed in her mind, "Some people never want the truth." But once it's spoken out loud, it lingers. It changes the air. The air in Three Cedars was shifting now. Not fast, not clean, but real. Later that night, Lena stood by the window of her room, watching the moonlight bathe the valley. The hills whispered in the breeze, and in the stillness, she felt the scar tissue of the past finally begin to soften. Isaac's voice came from the doorway. "Sheriff says the verdict might come tomorrow." She turned toward him. "And if it goes the wrong way, we keep building," he said. "We don't need a gavel to do the right thing." She nodded. Isaac stepped closer, his presence warm, grounding. "You ready for what comes next?" Lena looked out at the land where broken girls had once been brought in under false promises, where lies had grown like weeds. "I'm ready to plant something new," she said. And in her chest, where once fear had nested, something stronger now took root. The morning of the verdict came with a sky full of slate-gray clouds, heavy and unmoving. It hadn't rained yet, but the air clung to the skin with a quiet tension, like the land itself was holding its breath. Lena stood at the front porch of the ranch house, arms crossed, boots planted, staring down the long dirt road that led into town. Isaac's horse was saddled and ready, but neither of them had moved toward it yet. Inside, the other women moved slowly, whispering over breakfast, their eyes flicking toward the clock above the mantel like it might decide the future. "You sure you're ready?" Isaac asked, his voice low, not pushing. Lena nodded without looking at him. "You're ready or not, the truth's already out there." He studied her a moment longer. "You remember what you told me that day under the cottonwoods," her lips tugged upward faintly, "that I wouldn't run again. And you haven't." His voice was soft, filled with a quiet reverence. "No matter what the court decides, you already won something they can't take back." She finally turned to meet his eyes. "I didn't do all this to win. I did it to break the cycle." Isaac reached into his coat and handed her the worn, folded letter that had started it all, the one Lena had written and never mailed. "Just in case you want to remind yourself where you started." She tucked it into her satchel without opening it. "I already know. I bled to get here." They rode into town in silence, the hooves thudding against the road in a steady rhythm. Three-seaters looked different now. Not cleaner, not louder, but more awake. Folks stepped out of stores, tipped their hats. Some offered nods of respect, others still watched with suspicion. But the difference was, they were watching her with awareness. Like the blinders had started to crack. Inside the courthouse, the tension was nearly tangible. The judge entered briskly, robes sweeping across the old floorboards. Miriam was already seated at the defense table, her face pinched and pale. Her lawyer kept a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't acknowledge it. Her pride had crumbled since the trial began, but there was something else now, an emptiness that no wealth could disguise. The jury filed in. 12 men and women of three-seaters chosen to weigh truth against habit, justice against comfort. Lena sat perfectly still. The foreman stood a slip of paper, trembling slightly in his fingers. "On the count of unlawful imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty." A collective intake of breath echoed through the room. "On the count of fraudulent land acquisition, guilty." Lena's heart pounded louder. "On the count of coercion and abuse under the pretense of guardianship, guilty." Gasps, whispers. Somewhere in the back, someone began to cry. Miriam's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. She just stared forward like the judgment wasn't real, like it couldn't possibly touch her. The judge's voice broke through. "Sentencing will be passed at a later date. Court is adjourned." Chairs scraped, people rose. Lena remained seated for a beat longer, the word guilty ringing in her mind over and over. Not as victory, but as release. Isaac's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. "It's done." She stood, knees trembling with the aftershock. It's just started. Outside the courthouse, the women of the ranch stood waiting. Elsie was in front, her eyes damp but proud. Behind her, others stood in plain dresses, hair tied back, backs straight. Survivors, every one of them. "They said it," one of them whispered as Lena approached. "They finally said it out loud." Lena nodded. "Now we build something different." That night, the ranch was brighter than it had been in months. A fire burned out back, and the women gathered with mugs of coffee and stories they never thought they'd tell. Laughter mingled with quiet tears. Someone played a fiddle, and for the first time, no one flinched at the sound of a raised voice or quick movement. Lena sat beside Isaac on the porch steps, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. "She'll be gone soon," she said, gazing at the stars. He nodded. But what she left behind won't disappear on its own. No, Lena agreed. But now we get to decide what grows in its place. Isaac turned toward her, eyes steady. You've changed this town more than any sheriff ever could. She shook her head. Not me. Us. All of us who refused to look away. A hush fell between them, comfortable and full. From behind, Elsie approached and knelt beside Lena. We had another visitor today. Lena raised a brow. Who state official? Said there's talk of formalizing the land transfer, making it permanent. Under your name this time. Lena blinked. Mine. Elsie nodded. They want you to run the place legally, not as a sanctuary, as a foundation, for recovery, education, transition. Lena stared into the fire. I never wanted power. But you earned leadership, Elsie said gently. There's a difference. Lena swallowed hard, the weight of it settling deep in her chest. Isaac watched her carefully. You don't have to decide tonight. No, Lena murmured more to herself than anyone. But I think I already have. She stood and looked at the barn where the walls were no longer cages but shelter. At the house where doors were no longer locked. At the land where children would one day run free, not traded for favors or hidden behind shame. She turned back to Isaac and Elsie. If we're going to make it a place for healing, we do it right. Not just buildings. We start with dignity. Elsie smiled. We already have. A soft breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispers of approval from something older than them all. Later that night, alone in her room, Lena finally unfolded the letter. Her handwriting stared back at her, shaky, angry, broken. A woman who once believed the only way out was to vanish. She read it slowly, line by line, and when she reached the end, she tore it in two. She didn't need it anymore. The quote Isaac had said days ago returned with new meaning. We don't need a gavel to do the right thing. The gavel had fallen, but rightness, that was a choice they would have to keep making every single day. And she was ready. A sharp gust cut across the fields as Lena climbed onto the fence post, eyes squinting toward the horizon. The land spread wide, its muted winter browns brushing against the distant foothills. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air tasted like it would any day now. Her coat flapped behind her, and the wind played in her hair, wild and unburdened. For the first time in years, she didn't brace herself against it. She let the wind move her. Behind her, hammers struck nails, voices shouted across the barn, and the smells of sawdust, hay, and cinnamon wafted in the cold morning light. The ranch was transforming, not just with paint or lumber, but with intention, and it pulsed with life. Inside the house, the parlor had been cleared of old furniture and shadows. Sunlight poured through the windows onto polished wood floors. A reading corner had replaced the liquor cabinet. Where punishment once echoed, laughter now found its rhythm. Even the walls seemed to breathe easier. It's strange, Elsie said as she joined Lena at the fence. How silence used to feel like fear here. Now it feels like peace. Lena nodded. It's not the house that changed. It's us. Elsie looked at her sideways. You still thinking about that offer? Lena didn't answer immediately. Her gaze traveled across the ranch where a group of young girls were learning how to ride. Among them was Naomi, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words when she first arrived. Now she was shouting instructions, confident in the saddle. They want me to expand, Lena finally said. To turn this place into something bigger. A series of homes, state-supported. Elsie's brow lifted. And you don't want that, I want to help. I just don't want to lose what made this work. Her voice lowered. It wasn't the buildings. It was the knowing. the shared pain, the survival. Elsie touched her arm. You don't have to do it their way. You just have to make sure it still feels like home. Isaac walked over, wiping his hands on a cloth. His shirt was smudged with dust and paint, and he wore that half-smile that meant he'd been watching them for a while. They're all waiting for you in the main hall, he said. Something about a vote. A vote. He chuckled. Apparently they've decided this place needs a name, and they won't pick one without you. Lena hesitated, then hopped off the fence. All right. Let's see what democracy looks like. Inside, the dining hall had been rearranged into a circle. Dozens of women, young, old, scarred, healed, sat waiting. A chalkboard stood at the front, names scrawled across it. Safe Haven, New Roots, Gracewood, Ember Ranch. We've narrowed it to 4, said Marla, one of the women who'd come just last month. But we want your vote to break the tie. Lena looked at the words. They were all beautiful, all full of meaning. But one stood out. Ember Ranch, she said quietly. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. Because embers don't die, Lena continued. They just wait for the wind to wake them up again. Applause broke out, not the loud ceremonial kind, but the steady rhythm of a community choosing to believe in something new. Later that evening, while Isaac checked the new roofing on the outer shed, Lena returned to the house and found Naomi sitting by the window sketching. You've gotten good, Lena said, nodding toward the page. Naomi smiled shyly. It's a picture of here, from memory. Lena studied the drawing, rough, imperfect, but full of warmth. You see things the way they're becoming, not just the way they are. Sometimes it's easier to draw a better future than to imagine it. Lena knelt beside her. Then maybe we make the future look like your drawings. Naomi looked up, surprised. Really? Lena nodded. Art speaks before words know what to say. Footsteps approached the door. It was Elsie again, holding a telegram in her hand. Her expression was unreadable. Lena took the envelope. Her stomach tightened. It was from the state. Official seal and all. She unfolded it slowly, scanning the words. Her eyes locked on the last line. She read it twice, then again to be sure. They approved it, she whispered. Full ownership. Not just temporary management. It's ours. Legally, permanently. Isaac stepped in behind her, pausing when he saw her expression. What is it? He asked. Lena handed him the paper. They didn't just approve the ownership, she said, her voice trembling. They're offering funding for replication. Ember Ranch could have sisters. Isaac read the document, eyes widening. They're giving you everything. No. Lena looked around the room at Naomi's drawing, at the hand-built shelves, at the laughter echoing from the kitchen. They're acknowledging what we built, what we are. Isaac smiled, stepping closer. So what now? Lena exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by the weight and wonder of it all. We plant, she said. Not just here. Everywhere they tried to burn us down, we plant something new. He touched her chin, gently tilting her face up. And if the storms come again, she smiled. Then we remind them some fires are meant to last. Outside, the first snow began to fall, soft, slow, like the sky was laying a clean sheet over the past. A signal not of erasure, but of readiness. The women stepped out, hands raised, mouths open in laughter. The snow clung to their hair, their shoulders, their hopes, and Lena stood among them, not as a savior or a survivor, but as a flame that refused to go out. The wind picked up. The embers stirred. The train station buzzed with quiet anticipation, its platform dusted with frost that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. Lena adjusted the scarf around her neck as she stood beneath the awning, watching as steam from the approaching engine curled into the sky. The wind tugged at her coat, but she stood still, composed, rooted. Beside her, Isaac held a folded paper, the official certificate stamped and signed marking Ember Ranch's designation as a federal model for trauma-informed rehabilitation. The ink was still fresh. The reality hadn't yet settled in. From the bench just behind them, Naomi sat with her sketchbook open, drawing the scene unfolding the arriving train, the new arrivals, the faces filled with fear and guarded hope. She wasn't sketching just lines. She was capturing emotions, the way tension clung to shoulders and then slowly softened. Lena's voice was quiet but steady. We're not just receiving people today. We're receiving everything they carry. Isaac didn't look away from the tracks. You think we're ready? No. She smiled faintly. But we're willing. The train hissed to a stop. The doors opened. Slowly, hesitantly, the passengers stepped down. A woman in her 50s with trembling hands. A teenage boy clutching a duffel bag like it was his only anchor. A mother carrying a baby wrapped in a threadbare blanket. And others. So many others. Eyes darting shoulders, hunched silence clinging to their every step. Lena stepped forward. Welcome to Ember Ranch. She said, her voice carrying gently above the steam and shuffle. You're safe here. The woman with trembling hands broke down first soft sobs like a dam finally giving way. The boy's grip loosened. The mother adjusted her baby's cap and nodded through her tears. One by one, they followed Lena, Isaac, and Naomi toward the waiting wagons, where blankets, hot cider, and gentle smiles waited. Back at the ranch, the main hall had been transformed. Quilts covered benches, soup simmered in iron pots, and hand-carved signs welcomed the new guests. You're home now. Your pain has a place. No more hiding. Elsie, who now ran the intake program, moved through the crowd with ease, making notes, offering comfort, directing helpers with subtle nods. We've expanded the north barn, she told Lena as they passed by each other. More beds? Heated. We'll need a few more hands in the kitchen, though. Lena nodded, already scanning the list in her head. Tell Marla to tap into the older girls. They've been asking to do more. I already did, Elsie said with a grin. They're baking bread as we speak. The whole place smells like cinnamon. Outside, the snow had thickened, laying down a blanket that made every step quieter, every sound softer. It was as if the land itself was preparing for the season of stillness, of healing. That night, Lena stood on the back porch of the main house, staring out into the darkness. Isaac joined her, bringing a wool blanket and draping it over both their shoulders. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking. About, she hesitated. The first time I stepped onto this land, I didn't know who I was. I was running from everything. I thought I was marrying a poor rancher desperate enough to want someone like me. Isaac smiled gently. And now she turned to look at him. Now I see everything clearly. This land, it wasn't poor. It was just waiting. Just like I was. Waiting to be claimed. Not with ownership papers or possession, but with care. With vision. Isaac wrapped his arm around her waist. You've made it a sanctuary. No, she said, leaning into him. We all did. The next morning, a celebration began to take form, unplanned but inevitable. Someone brought out an old fiddle, another a tambourine. The girls braided ribbons into each other's hair, and the younger children built snow creatures in the yard. The women cooked the men, repaired loose hinges, and crooked doors, and for the first time, the newcomers smiled without flinching. Naomi stood at the head of a long table, her sketchbook now filled with drawings from every corner of Ember Ranch. She turned the pages for the children, telling stories through the pictures, how the barn was rebuilt after a storm, how a lost dog found its way home, How laughter was heard again in the orchard. These drawings, one of the new boys whispered, they feel like dreams I forgot I had. And Naomi, once too afraid to speak, answered, they're not dreams, they're your memories waiting to happen. Lena watched from across the field, her heart full, her breath misting in the cold. She remembered the quote Naomi had written beneath one of her first sketches. We are not broken by the fire. We are reborn by it. That afternoon, Lena gathered the older girls and read aloud the plans from the state, the new branches of Ember Ranch, to be built across tribal lands, near reservations, rural towns, places long forgotten by systems and safety. And she didn't speak with hesitation. She spoke with purpose. You will lead them, she said to the girls. You've lived this. You've walked through fire. That makes you the strongest builders of all. One girl, Myra, raised her hand. What if we're scared? Lena stepped forward, then led scared. But lead. They nodded. The sun set behind the hills, casting golden light across the snowy fields. Fires crackled in every hearth. Songs were sung, the kind that carry sorrow in one verse, triumph in the next. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. Later that night, Isaac found Lena in the small chapel room they'd built, just a few pews across carved by one of the boys, and a stained glass window gifted by a local artist. She was lighting candles, each one bearing a name etched at the base. For the ones we lost? He asked. She nodded. And for the ones still trying to find their way. He lit a candle beside hers. Then let's keep the light burning. She took a hand. Always. The wind howled outside, but inside Ember Ranch warmth reigned. Love held firm. The story of survival had become one of legacy. And somewhere deep in the silence, a truth settled over the land like snow. The world thought they buried us in ashes, but we were never ashes. We were embers, and embers rise. The educational lesson learned from this story is that healing is not found in wealth, status, or escape, but in choosing to rebuild, to care, and to stay. Even when life brings ashes, there's power in embracing the embers, those small, glowing pieces of hope that remain. Community purpose and love can transform pain into legacy when nurtured with patience and courage. For those in later seasons of life, it's a reminder that it's never too late to plant seeds of change or to witness beauty grow from broken ground.